The train's whistle cut through the frozen January air like a knife, and Adelaide Zimmerman wondered if she had made the most foolish decision of her 22 years, stepping off that rail car into a world of ice and snow. Her breath came out in white clouds as she stood on the platform in Chico, California, clutching her worn carpetbag with fingers that had long since lost feeling. The winter of 1885 had brought an unexpected cold snap to the northern California town, and the platform was slick with ice that made each step treacherous. She had expected warmth, perhaps even sunshine, based on everything she had read about California. Instead, she found herself in what felt like the frozen reaches of Montana or Wyoming. Adelaide's thin wool coat, purchased second-hand in Boston before her departure, did nothing to shield her from the biting wind that swept down from the Sierra Nevada mountains. She had sold nearly everything she owned to afford the train ticket west, responding to an advertisement placed by a rancher named Theodore Oakes, who sought a wife. Their correspondence over the past 4 months had been polite, even warm at times, but now as she stood alone on the platform watching the train pull away, doubt crept into her heart like the cold seeping into her bones. The platform began to empty as other passengers were greeted by loved ones or made their way into town. Adelaide scanned the faces of those remaining, looking for a man who matched the description Theodore had provided in his letters. Tall, he had written, with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. But as the minutes ticked by and the platform grew quieter, no one approached her. The cold became unbearable. Her legs began to shake, whether from fear or the temperature she could not say. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue and tasted copper. She tried to take a step toward the shelter of the station house, but her feet would not obey. The cold had worked its way so deeply into her body that her limbs felt disconnected from her mind. Panic rose in her chest. Had Theodore Oakes changed his mind? Had he taken one look at her from afar and decided she would not do? She was not a beauty by any means, with her plain brown hair and unremarkable features. Perhaps he had hoped for someone more refined, more attractive. The thought brought tears to her eyes that froze on her lashes. Adelaide had fled Boston after her father's death left her penniless, and at the mercy of an uncle who drank away what little money remained. She had worked as a seamstress for 3 years, living in a boarding house with 6 other women in a room meant for 2, saving every penny she could spare. The advertisement for a mail-order bride had seemed like providence, a chance for a new life far from the cramped, gray streets of her childhood. Now she wondered if she had simply traded one misery for another. The cold became everything. She could no longer feel her toes in her worn boots. Her fingers had gone numb despite being balled into fists inside her pockets. She wanted to move to seek warmth, but her body refused. The world began to narrow, the edges of her vision going dark. She swayed on her feet, certain she would fall, when a voice cut through the fog descending over her mind. "I have been waiting for you." The words were spoken in a deep, warm voice that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. Adelaide tried to focus on the source, but her eyes would not cooperate. She felt strong hands grip her arms, steadying her before she could collapse onto the icy platform. "Easy now," the voice continued. "You are frozen clear through. How long have you been standing here?" "I do not know," Adelaide managed through chattering teeth. "The train arrived and I thought someone would come, but no one did, and then I could not move." "Lord have mercy," the man said, and suddenly Adelaide felt herself being lifted. She wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body had given up the fight against the cold. She was carried through the air, cradled against a chest that radiated blessed warmth. She caught glimpses of a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, dark hair beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and yes, there above the left eyebrow, a thin white scar. "Theodore Oakes," she whispered. "That would be me," he replied, shouldering his way through a door that led into the station house. "And you must be Adelaide. I am sorry I was not on the platform when you arrived. My horse threw a shoe 2 miles outside town and I had to walk him into the blacksmith. I came as fast as I could." The warmth of the station house felt almost painful against Adelaide's frozen skin. Theodore carried her to a bench near a potbelly stove and set her down gently. He immediately began working the buttons on her inadequate coat with nimble fingers. "We need to get you warm before you lose any fingers or toes to frostbite," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Why did you not go inside the station?" "I was afraid you would not find me," Adelaide admitted, shame heating her cheeks more effectively than the stove. "I thought if I moved from where the train left me, you would think I had not come after all." Theodore paused in his ministrations and looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean. "I would have torn this town apart looking for you if I thought you were lost," he said simply. "You are going to be my wife, Adelaide. I do not abandon what is mine." Something in the way he said it, with such absolute certainty, made Adelaide's heart skip a beat. She had expected many things from this arrangement. Companionship, perhaps, a roof over her head certainly, but the fierce protectiveness in Theodore's eyes spoke of something deeper. He removed her coat and immediately wrapped her in his own heavy sheepskin jacket, which still held his body heat and smelled of leather, horses, and something woodsy she could not identify. He knelt before her and began unlacing her boots with gentle hands. "This might hurt," he warned. "The blood returning to your extremities is not pleasant." He was right. As her feet began to warm, 1,000 needles seemed to prick her skin. Adelaide bit her lip to keep from crying out, not wanting to seem weak before this man who was still essentially a stranger. But Theodore noticed her distress and looked up at her with sympathy. "Go ahead and curse if you need to," he said. "I have heard worse from my ranch hands when they get caught in the cold." Despite herself, Adelaide laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "Ladies do not curse, Mr. Oakes." "Call me Thomas," he said. "And out here, ladies do whatever they need to survive. This is not Boston, Adelaide." "How did you know I would prefer Thomas to Theodore?" she asked, grateful for the distraction from the painful tingling in her feet. "You called me Theodore in your first letter," Thomas said, working her boots off carefully and examining her toes with a practiced eye. "But in your second letter, you asked if you might call me Thomas instead. You said Theodore sounded too formal for a man you hoped to build a life with." "I liked that. It showed spirit." Adelaide remembered writing those words by candlelight in her cramped boarding-house room, terrified she had been too forward. She had nearly thrown the letter away and started over, but her dwindling supply of paper had made her reconsider. Now she was glad she had taken the risk. "Your toes look like they will be fine," Thomas announced, relief evident in his voice. "Pink and cold but no white spots. That is a good sign." He looked up at her again and a slow smile spread across his face. "You are exactly as I imagined." "Plain and unremarkable," Adelaide said before she could stop herself. Thomas frowned. "Brave and honest," he corrected. "It takes courage to travel across a continent to marry a stranger, and you have kind eyes. I have always thought that mattered more than conventional beauty." Adelaide did not know what to say to that. Men in Boston had never complimented her eyes or called her brave. They had mostly not noticed her at all. "I brought dry socks," Thomas continued, producing a pair from his saddlebag. "They will be too big, but at least they are warm." Then we need to get you to the hotel and into a proper bed. You need rest and hot food." "Hotel?" Adelaide asked. "I thought we would go to your ranch." Thomas shook his head as he helped her put on the thick wool socks. "The ranch is 15 miles outside town, and the roads are treacherous with ice. I will not risk you taking another chill. We will stay in town tonight and tomorrow, get you properly outfitted for California winters, which I admit are not usually this harsh, and then head to the ranch when you are stronger." "But the expense," Adelaide protested. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Thomas said firmly. "You are my intended wife. Caring for you is not an expense, it is a privilege." He stood and offered her his hand. "Can you walk?" Adelaide took his hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady but functional. The warmth from the stove and Thomas's jacket had worked wonders, though she still shivered intermittently. "Good," Thomas said. "The hotel is just across the street. Lean on me if you need to." Adelaide did need to, more than she wanted to admit, but Thomas did not seem to mind. He kept one strong arm around her waist as he guided her out of the station house and across the icy street to a 3-story building with a painted sign that read, "Golden State Hotel." The lobby was blessedly warm, with a large fireplace crackling merrily and thick rugs covering polished wood floors. A woman behind the desk looked up as they entered, her eyes widening slightly at Adelaide's bedraggled appearance. "Thomas Oakes," she said in greeting. "I heard you were expecting a visitor." "My bride, Adelaide Zimmerman," Thomas confirmed. "She needs a room for the night, hot water for a bath, and a tray sent up with supper." "Of course," the woman said, though her gaze lingered on Adelaide with open curiosity. "Will you be needing one room or two?" "Two," Thomas said firmly. "We are not married yet. That will wait until Adelaide has rested and we can arrange a proper ceremony." Something in Adelaide's chest loosened at his words. She had worried, in the dark hours of her journey west, that Theodore Oakes might prove to be a man without honor who would take advantage of their isolated situation. But Thomas's insistence on propriety, even when no one would have faulted him for doing otherwise, spoke volumes about his character. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Harrington, led them up a narrow staircase to the second floor. She opened the door to a small but clean room with a brass bed covered in a thick quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street. "I will have the hot water sent up directly," Mrs. Harrington said. "And Thomas, your usual room is ready next door." After she left, Thomas helped Adelaide to the chair by the window and knelt in front of her again, his expression serious. "I know this is not how you imagined your arrival," he said. "And I am truly sorry I was not there when you needed me, but I want you to know that I meant every word I wrote in my letters. I need a wife, yes, but more than that, I want a partner, someone to build a life with. I hope you will give me the chance to prove I can be the husband you deserve." Adelaide looked into his earnest face and felt something shift inside her. She had expected practicality from this arrangement, a business transaction dressed up as marriage. But the man before her was offering something more, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I want that too," she said softly. "A real partnership, a real marriage, not just an arrangement." Thomas smiled, and it transformed his entire face, chasing away the hard edges and revealing genuine warmth. "Then we are in agreement." He stood and moved toward the door. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we will start fresh." After he left, Adelaide sat in the chair feeling oddly bereft. The room seemed colder without his presence. But soon there was a knock at the door, and 2 young men carried in a copper tub, followed by buckets of steaming water. Mrs. Harrington herself brought a tray laden with roast chicken, potatoes, carrots, thick bread with butter, and a pot of hot tea. You eat that while the bath is still hot, she instructed. And if you need anything at all, you just ring that bell. She pointed to a small bell on the nightstand. Adelaide thanked her, and after the door closed, she ate with an appetite she had not felt in months. The food was simple but delicious, and the hot tea did more to chase away the lingering cold than anything else could have. Finally, she slipped into the bath and let the heat soak into her bones. She washed away the grime of travel and the fear of the platform, emerging feeling more like herself than she had since leaving Boston. She found a clean nightgown in her carpet bag, one of the few nice things she owned, made by her own hands with careful stitches and a bit of lace at the collar. She climbed into the bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The mattress was softer than anything she had slept on in years. As exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, her last thought was of gray-blue eyes and a voice saying, "I have been waiting for you." The morning brought weak sunshine that did little to melt the ice but raised Adelaide's spirits considerably. She dressed in her best day dress, a dove-gray wool that she had let out and taken in so many times the seams were barely holding, and braided her hair into a simple coronet. When she made her way downstairs, she found Thomas waiting in the lobby, clean-shaven now and wearing a fresh shirt under his sheepskin coat. "You look rested," he said, standing when he saw her. "How do you feel?" "Much better," Adelaide assured him. "Thank you for everything yesterday. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me when you did." "Let us not dwell on what might have been," Thomas said. "Today is for practical matters. We need to get you a proper coat, some warmer boots, and whatever else you will need for ranch life. I am not much of a shopper, but I know what works in the cold." They spent the morning visiting the general store and the dressmaker's shop. Thomas proved to be patient and thoughtful, insisting Adelaide get not just necessities but a few luxuries as well. A warm cloak lined with rabbit fur, sturdy boots that actually fit, thick stockings and wool dresses suitable for ranch work, a beautiful shawl in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. "This is too much," Adelaide protested as the pile of purchases grew. "I cannot possibly accept all this." "You can and you will," Thomas said. "You came out here with almost nothing because you were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger. The least I can do is make sure you are warm and comfortable." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. She was not accustomed to such generosity, to being cared for without expectation of something in return. At noon, Thomas took her to a small restaurant where they sat across from each other and talked properly for the first time. Adelaide learned that Thomas was 28 years old, had been ranching in California for 6 years, and had built his operation from nothing into a successful cattle ranch with over 300 head. He had 2 ranch hands who worked for him year-round, brothers named Jack and Samuel Morrison, and he hired additional help during roundup and branding season. "Why did you decide to advertise for a wife?" Adelaide asked, her natural curiosity overcoming her sense of propriety. Thomas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Loneliness," he said finally. "I have worked hard to build something out here, but at the end of the day I go home to an empty house. I eat alone, sleep alone, and have no one to share my successes or failures with. I wanted a family, Adelaide, children someday, a woman to talk to about more than cattle prices and weather." He looked up and met her eyes. "And I will be honest with you. Ranch life is hard. I needed someone practical, someone who would not wilt at the first sign of difficulty. Your letters convinced me you were that woman." "What in my letters told you that?" Adelaide asked, genuinely curious. "You did not romanticize your situation or mine," Thomas said. "You were honest about why you were responding to the advertisement. You needed security and a fresh start, and you did not pretend otherwise. But you also wrote about wanting to learn ranch skills, about being willing to work alongside me. That matters more than you might think." Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks at his praise. "I only wrote the truth. I am not the sort of woman who can afford to be anything but practical." "That is exactly why I knew you were right," Thomas said softly. "Too many people confuse desperation with weakness, but it takes strength to acknowledge a difficult situation and take steps to change it." Their conversation ranged over many topics as they finished their meal. Adelaide told him about her childhood, about her father who had been a clerk before illness took him, about her mother who had died when Adelaide was only 12. She spoke of her uncle's cruelty, though she downplayed it, not wanting to seem pitiable. Thomas listened with full attention, asking questions and seeming genuinely interested in her life. In turn, he told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about heading west after his parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 22, about the backbreaking work of establishing a ranch in unfamiliar territory. He spoke of cattle drives and long winters, of prairie fires and drought, but also of the satisfaction of watching something grow through his own efforts. "I will not lie to you about what life on the ranch will be like," Thomas said as they prepared to leave the restaurant. "It is isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. The work is constant, especially during calving season. And California may be warmer than some places, but we still get snow in the mountains and cold snaps like this one. There will be days when you long for the company of other women, for the conveniences of town life." "But," Adelaide prompted, sensing there was more. Thomas smiled. "But there is also a kind of freedom in it. We are beholden to no one but ourselves. What we build is ours. And the land here, Adelaide, it is beautiful in a way that takes your breath away. Wide open spaces where you can see for miles, mountains that turn purple at sunset, rivers so clear you can see every stone on the bottom." Adelaide could hear the love in his voice when he spoke of his ranch, and it made her want to see it through his eyes. "When can we leave for the ranch?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning if the roads have cleared enough," Thomas said. "But first we need to take care of one more thing." He hesitated, looking almost nervous for the first time since she had met him. "We need to get married." Adelaide's heart began to pound. She had known this was coming, had traveled across the continent for exactly this purpose, but now that the moment was here, she felt suddenly terrified. Thomas must have seen something in her face because he quickly continued. "We do not have to if you are not ready. I told you yesterday that I wanted to do this right, and I meant it. If you need more time to get to know me, to be certain this is what you want, I will wait. You can come to the ranch as my employee, as my friend, and we can take whatever time you need to decide." His consideration for her feelings, his willingness to wait despite the inconvenience it would cause him, made Adelaide's decision easier. She had spent 3 years in Boston working for people who saw her as nothing more than hands to sew their clothes, a body to exploit for labor. Thomas saw her as a person, as someone whose feelings and comfort mattered. That alone was worth taking a chance on. "No," she said firmly. "I do not need more time. I came here to marry you, Thomas Oakes, and that is what I intend to do." Relief flooded Thomas's face. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Adelaide confirmed. "We have been honest with each other from the beginning. That is more than many couples have when they marry. I think we can build something good together." The wedding took place that afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. The minister, an elderly man named Reverend Talbot, performed the ceremony with his wife and Mrs. Harrington serving as witnesses. Adelaide wore her best dress, the dove gray wool, with the blue shawl Thomas had bought her draped around her shoulders. Thomas had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, dark blue that brought out the color of his eyes, and he had slicked his dark hair back with water so it lay smooth. Standing before the minister, Adelaide was acutely aware that she had known this man for less than 24 hours. But when Thomas took her hand and spoke his vows in a steady voice, promising to honor and cherish her for all the days of his life, she felt the rightness of this decision deep in her bones. Her own voice shook slightly as she repeated the traditional words, but she meant everyone. When Reverend Talbot pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas leaned down and kissed her gently, respectfully, as if she were something precious. It was Adelaide's first kiss, and though it was brief, it left her breathless. They signed the marriage certificate, and Mrs. Harrington hugged Adelaide warmly. "You have married a good man," she whispered. "Thomas Oakes has a reputation for fairness and hard work. You will be happy with him." That evening, they had dinner together in the hotel restaurant, and Adelaide was intensely aware that everything had changed. She was no longer Adelaide Zimmerman, destitute seamstress from Boston. She was Adelaide Oakes, wife of a California rancher. The reality of it was both thrilling and terrifying. After dinner, they stood together in the hallway between their two rooms. Thomas still maintained the separate sleeping arrangements, though they were now legally wed. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that I have no expectations tonight, or any night until you are ready. Marriage is more than that. I want us to be comfortable with each other first." Adelaide was moved by his consideration, though part of her wondered if perhaps he was not attracted to her after all. But the way his eyes lingered on her face, the way his hand tightened around hers, suggested otherwise. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being patient with me, for being kind." "You do not need to thank me for treating you decently," Thomas said. "That is the bare minimum you should expect from a husband." He kissed her hand and bid her good night, disappearing into his own room before Adelaide could find words to respond. She lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the hotel settling around her, thinking about the man she had married and the life that awaited her at his ranch. The next morning dawned clear and slightly warmer. The ice on the streets had begun to melt, creating treacherous puddles but also indicating that travel would be safer. After breakfast, Thomas settled their bill with Mrs. Harrington and loaded Adelaide's new purchases along with her carpetbag into a sturdy wagon hitched to two strong horses. "The ranch is about 3 hours from here if the roads are good," Thomas explained as he helped Adelaide onto the wagon seat. "We will take it slow. No point rushing and risking injury to the horses." Adelaide settled onto the bench seat and pulled the fur-lined cloak tightly around herself. The morning air was still cold, though not as bitterly so as the day she had arrived. As they left Chico behind, heading northeast toward the foothills, Adelaide felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness churning in her stomach. The landscape unfolded before them in shades of brown and gold, with patches of snow lingering in shaded areas. The valley stretched wide and flat, bounded by mountains in the distance that still wore white caps. Thomas pointed out landmarks as they traveled, explaining the geography with obvious affection for this land he had made his home. "That is Big Chico Creek," he said, indicating a ribbon of water glinting in the winter sunlight. "It runs through part of my land, provides water for the cattle, and never runs dry, even in the hottest summers." As they traveled, Thomas told her more about the ranch. "The house is not much to look at from the outside," he admitted. "I built it myself 6 years ago, and I focused more on function than beauty. But it is solid and keeps out the weather. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace and a kitchen. There is a barn for the horses, a bunkhouse where Jack and Samuel stay, and several outbuildings for tools and feed." "It sounds perfect," Adelaide said honestly. She had lived in a single room with 5 other women for 3 years. A house with 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen sounded like a palace. The wagon climbed gradually as they left the valley floor, following a road that was little more than 2 ruts worn into the earth. The landscape changed, becoming more rugged and wild. Oak trees dotted the rolling hills, and Adelaide spotted cattle grazing in the distance, their reddish-brown hides stark against the winter grass. "Those are some of mine," Thomas said with obvious pride. "Mostly Herefords. Good cattle, hardy, and they thrive in this climate. I started with just 20 heads 6 years ago. Now I have over 300. Adelaide was impressed. She knew little about ranching, but even she understood that such growth represented years of hard work and smart management. As they crested a rise, Thomas pulled the wagon to a halt and pointed. "There. That is home." Adelaide looked where he indicated and saw a valley nestled between 2 hills. A house built of rough-hewn logs sat near a creek, smoke rising from its stone chimney. Nearby stood a large barn, several smaller outbuildings and corrals containing horses. The setting was isolated but beautiful, with mountains rising in the distance and oak trees framing the buildings like a picture. "Oh, Thomas," Adelaide breathed. "It is wonderful." She felt him relax beside her, as if her approval mattered deeply. "Wait until spring," he said. "The whole valley turns green and there are wildflowers everywhere. Blue lupine and California poppies covering the hillsides. It is something to see." He urged the horses forward and they descended into the valley. As they approached the house, 2 men emerged from the barn. Both were tall and lean, dressed in work clothes and wide-brimmed hats. They watched the wagon with open curiosity. Thomas pulled the horses to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then turned to help Adelaide. The 2 men approached, removing their hats respectfully. "Adelaide, these are my ranch hands, Jack and Samuel Morrison," Thomas said. "Brothers and about the best workers a man could ask for." "Jack, Samuel, this is my wife, Adelaide Oakes." Adelaide noted the surprise on both men's faces, though they quickly schooled their expressions. The older one, Jack, she guessed, was perhaps 30 with sun-weathered skin and laugh lines around his eyes. Samuel looked younger, maybe 25, with a more serious demeanor. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Oakes," Jack said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "Thomas here did not mention he was getting married when he left for town." "The lady deserves some privacy about her business," Thomas said mildly. "But yes, Adelaide and I were married yesterday. She has come all the way from Boston to be here." "Boston," Samuel said, speaking for the first time. "That is quite a journey, madam. Welcome to California." "Thank you," Adelaide said warmly. "I look forward to getting to know you both. We will get your things inside," Jack offered, already reaching for the packages in the wagon bed. "You folks go on in and get warm." Thomas led Adelaide to the front door and pushed it open. The interior was dim after the bright sunshine outside, but as her eyes adjusted, Adelaide saw a large room with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. A table with 4 chairs sat near the kitchen area, and 2 worn but comfortable-looking chairs were positioned before the fireplace. The floor was rough wood, but it was clean and well swept. Simple curtains hung at the windows, and shelves built into one wall held books and various odds and ends. "The bedroom is through there," Thomas said, pointing to a door on the left side of the room. "The other bedroom is there, on the right. I thought you might want your own space, at least for now. You can choose whichever room you prefer." Adelaide moved through the house, examining everything with interest. The bedroom on the left was clearly Thomas's. A large bed took up most of the space, and masculine belongings were scattered about. The room on the right was smaller but tidy, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. "This will be fine," Adelaide said, though she felt a strange disappointment that she could not quite name. She had expected to share Thomas's room, his bed, to truly begin their life as husband and wife. But perhaps he still saw her as a stranger, not yet ready to be a true wife to him. Jack and Samuel brought in her belongings, and Adelaide spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking and arranging the small room to her liking. Thomas had to attend to ranch business, checking on the cattle and making sure the cold snap had not caused any problems. So Adelaide had time to explore her new home at her leisure. The kitchen was basic but functional, with a good stove and sufficient pots and pans. The pantry was well stocked with staples, though it was clear a bachelor had been doing the shopping. Lots of beans, flour, and coffee, but little in the way of spices or anything that might make a meal interesting. Adelaide made mental notes of what she would need from town on their next trip. That evening, Thomas returned to the house cold and tired. Adelaide had spent the afternoon making dinner, a simple stew from supplies she found in the pantry, but she had added herbs and seasoning to make it more flavorful. She had also baked biscuits, using her mother's old recipe that she still remembered by heart. Thomas's face when he walked in and smelled the cooking was worth every minute she had spent in the kitchen. "Lord above," he said, stopping in his tracks. "Is that fresh bread I smell?" "Biscuits," Adelaide corrected, feeling pleased by his reaction. "And stew. I hope you do not mind that I took the liberty of using your supplies." "Mind," Thomas laughed, removing his hat and coat. "Adelaide, those supplies are your supplies now. This is your home as much as mine. You do not need my permission to cook in your own kitchen." They sat down to dinner, and Thomas ate with the enthusiasm of a man who had been living on his own cooking for too long. "This is delicious," he said after his third biscuit. "I had no idea what I was missing." "It is nothing fancy," Adelaide demurred, but she was warmed by his praise. After dinner, they sat before the fire and talked. Thomas told her about his day, about the cattle and the work that would need to be done in the coming weeks. Adelaide told him about her explorations of the house and her plans for improving the kitchen organization. "You really do not need to work so hard," Thomas said. "I mean, I appreciate the cooking and such, but I did not marry you to be my housekeeper. I married you to be my partner." "I know," Adelaide said, "but I want to contribute, I want to feel useful." Thomas reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her so casually, and Adelaide felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You are useful," he said seriously. "You are here. That alone makes everything different better. I have spent 6 years coming home to an empty house, Adelaide. Now I have someone to talk to, someone to share my days with. That is worth more than all the cooking and cleaning in the world." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so much of her life being valued only for what she could produce, what she could do. To be valued simply for existing, for being present, was a novel experience. As the days turned into weeks, Adelaide settled into life on the ranch. The weather gradually warmed, though winter maintained its grip on the mountains. She established routines for herself, rising early to make breakfast for Thomas before he headed out to work with Jack and Samuel. She spent her mornings doing household chores, but she also began to explore the immediate area around the ranch house, familiarizing herself with her new home. Thomas kept his word about treating her as a partner. He consulted her about decisions, from what supplies to order for the ranch to where to place a new corral he was planning. He taught her to ride, patiently guiding her through the basics on a gentle mare named Clover. Adelaide proved to be a quick study, and soon she was riding out with Thomas to check on the cattle, learning the work of the ranch alongside him. Their relationship deepened through these shared experiences. Adelaide learned that Thomas had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She discovered he was an avid reader, working his way through everything from agricultural journals to novels by Charles Dickens. He learned that Adelaide had a talent for drawing and encouraged her to sketch the landscape around them. He discovered she sang while she worked, old folk songs her mother had taught her, and he often found himself stopping just to listen. But despite their growing closeness, Thomas maintained a respectful distance. He still slept in his own room, still treated Adelaide more like a cherished friend than a wife. Adelaide told herself she should be grateful for his patience, but as January turned to February, she began to feel frustrated by the situation. One evening, after they had finished dinner and were sitting by the fire, Adelaide decided to address the matter directly. Beating around the bush had never been her style. "Thomas," she said, setting down the sewing she had been working on, "may I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, looking up from the book he was reading. "You can ask me anything." Adelaide took a deep breath. "Do you regret marrying me?" Thomas's expression shifted to shock. "What? No, of course not. What would make you think that? You do not." Adelaide felt her cheeks heat but forced herself to continue. "You do not seem to want me as a wife, as a true wife, I mean. We have been married for over a month and you still keep your distance. I thought perhaps you found me unattractive or that you had changed your mind about the arrangement." Thomas closed his book and leaned forward, his expression intense. "Adelaide, you could not be more wrong. I want you so much it keeps me awake at night, but I promised you I would not push, that I would wait until you were ready." "But I am ready," Adelaide said, her heart pounding. "I have been ready. I was waiting for you." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Adelaide had learned meant he was frustrated or conflicted. "I did not want you to feel obligated. You married me out of necessity, out of need for security. I did not want to take advantage of that." Adelaide stood and moved to kneel in front of Thomas's chair, taking his hands in hers. "Thomas Oakes, I may have responded to your advertisement out of necessity, but I married you because I wanted to, because I saw in your letters a man I could respect, perhaps even grow to love. This past month has only confirmed that. You are kind and patient and honorable, and I am proud to be your wife. I want to be your wife in every way." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his gray-blue eyes searching hers. "You are certain?" "I am certain," Adelaide whispered. Thomas leaned down and kissed her, not gently this time but with passion and pent-up longing. Adelaide responded with equal fervor, wrapping her arms around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Perhaps," Thomas said, his voice rough, "we should continue this conversation in the bedroom." Adelaide nodded, feeling nervous but excited. Thomas stood and swept her into his arms, carrying her across the room to his bedroom. He set her down gently beside the bed and began to unpin her hair, running his fingers through the long brown strands once they were loose. "You are beautiful," he murmured. "I have wanted to do this since the moment I saw you on that platform, frozen and frightened but refusing to give up." What followed was tender and awkward and wonderful. Thomas was patient with Adelaide's inexperience, showing her with touch and whispered words how much he desired her. Adelaide felt herself bloom under his attention, discovering a passionate side to her nature she had not known existed. When it was over, they lay tangled together, both breathless and amazed. "That was," Adelaide began, but could not find adequate words. "Perfect," Thomas finished. "You are perfect." From that night forward, they shared Thomas's bed, and their marriage became complete in every sense. The physical intimacy deepened their emotional bond, and Adelaide found herself falling in love with her husband more each day. As winter reluctantly gave way to spring, the ranch came alive with activity. Calving season began in late February, and Adelaide quickly learned that it meant long days and sometimes sleepless nights. Cows giving birth often needed assistance, and complications could arise that required immediate attention. One cold evening in early March, Thomas burst into the house with snow on his shoulders despite it being spring. "Adelaide, I need your help," he said urgently. "We have a cow in trouble. First calf and she cannot seem to get it out. I need another pair of hands, and Jack and Samuel are both tending to problems in the north pasture." Adelaide did not hesitate. She grabbed her cloak and followed Thomas out to the barn. Inside, in one of the stalls, a young heifer was lying on her side, clearly in distress. Thomas knelt beside her and began examining the situation. "The calf is breech," he said grimly. "I am going to have to turn it. Adelaide, I need you to hold her head and try to keep her calm." Adelaide positioned herself at the cow's head, stroking her neck and speaking in soothing tones. She had to look away as Thomas worked, his face set in concentration as he tried to manipulate the unborn calf into the correct position. The cow bellowed in pain, and Adelaide felt tears on her cheeks. "Almost there," Thomas muttered. "Come on, little one, work with me." Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, Thomas gave a grunt of satisfaction. "Got it. The head is turned. Now we just need to help Mama push." Adelaide watched in awe as Thomas helped deliver the calf, pulling carefully during contractions, until finally a wet, gangly creature slid onto the straw. Thomas immediately began rubbing the calf with handfuls of straw, stimulating it to breathe. For a terrible moment nothing happened, and then the calf gave a wet cough and began to breathe on its own. "It is a bull calf," Thomas announced with satisfaction, "strong and healthy by the look of him." The mother cow, exhausted but alert, immediately turned her attention to her newborn, beginning to lick him clean. Adelaide felt overwhelming emotion watching the scene, the primal bond between mother and child, the miracle of new life. Thomas stood, covered in blood and birth fluids, and grinned at Adelaide. "Welcome to spring on the ranch," he said. "This is just the first of many. We will have at least 50 more calves born in the next month." Adelaide should have been horrified by the mess, by the visceral reality of birth. Instead, she felt exhilarated. "What can I do to help with the others?" Thomas's expression softened. "You really are something special, you know that. Most women would have run from the barn screaming." "I am not most women," Adelaide said. "I am a rancher's wife. And if this is part of the work, then I will learn it." And learn it she did. Over the next month, Adelaide became adept at assisting with difficult births, at recognizing signs of trouble, at caring for the newborn calves. She learned to bottle feed the calves whose mothers could not or would not nurse them. She learned to treat minor injuries and illnesses, following Thomas's instructions and asking questions constantly. She also learned the rhythm of ranch life, the way the days stretched from before dawn until after dark during busy seasons, the way weather dictated so much of what could and could not be done, the way the isolation could feel oppressive one moment and like perfect freedom the next. In April, when the wildflowers Thomas had promised bloomed across the hillsides, he took Adelaide on a picnic to show her his favorite spot on the ranch. They rode for an hour, climbing into the foothills until they reached a meadow carpeted in blue and gold flowers. A small creek bubbled through the center, and oak trees provided shade around the edges. "This is where I come when I need to think," Thomas said as he helped Adelaide dismount. "When I first came to California, this meadow sold me on this land. I knew if I could own this place, I would be content for the rest of my life." They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Adelaide had packed. The day was warm and perfect, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. After they ate, they lay side by side on the blanket, looking up at the impossibly blue sky. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Truly happy. I know ranch life is not easy. I know you left behind everything familiar. But are you glad you came?" Adelaide turned on her side to face him. "Thomas, I am happier than I ever imagined possible. In Boston, I was invisible. I worked and slept and worked some more, and no one saw me as anything more than a pair of hands. Here with you, I matter. What I think and feel and want matters. How could I be anything but happy?" Thomas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you," he said quietly. "I did not plan to fall in love with you so quickly. I thought we would build friendship and partnership, and perhaps affection would come later. But I love you, Adelaide. I need you to know that." Adelaide felt her heart swell until she thought it might burst. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you carried me off that frozen platform, but I did not recognize it at first. I thought I was just grateful, just relieved. But it is more than that. You have given me a life, Thomas, a real life." They made love there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and birdsong, and Adelaide felt as though she had finally found the place she was meant to be. Summer brought its own challenges. The weather turned hot and dry, and the work of the ranch shifted to maintaining water sources for the cattle and preparing for the annual trip to the railhead in Sacramento to sell the spring calves. Thomas made the trip every year with Jack and Samuel, driving a herd of young cattle the 3-day journey to sell them at market. It was one of the primary sources of income for the ranch. "I do not want to leave you alone," Thomas said as they discussed the upcoming trip. "But I need to go to make sure I get fair prices." "I will be fine," Adelaide assured him. "I am not helpless, Thomas. I can manage the house and the animals here for a week." "It will be more than a week," Thomas said. "At least 10 days, maybe 12 depending on how quickly we can sell the herd." Adelaide hid her dismay. The thought of being alone for nearly 2 weeks was daunting, but she refused to be the clingy wife who kept her husband from necessary work. "Then it will be 10 days, she said firmly. "I will still be here when you return." The night before Thomas was set to leave, they held each other close in bed, neither wanting to sleep and waste their last hours together. "Promise me you will be careful," Adelaide said. "The roads are dangerous and I have heard stories about bandits." "I promise," Thomas said. "We will have the herd to worry about, but Jack and Samuel are both good with rifles and we know the route well. You are the one who needs to be careful. Do not try to handle anything beyond basic chores. If something happens with the cattle or one of the horses, just let it wait until I return." "I promise," Adelaide said, though she privately thought she would handle whatever problems arose to the best of her ability. The next morning, Adelaide watched Thomas ride off with Jack and Samuel, driving a herd of nearly 100 young cattle before them. The house felt impossibly empty after they left. Adelaide threw herself into work to avoid thinking about how much she missed her husband after only a few hours. The first few days passed uneventfully. Adelaide tended the chickens, milked the cow they kept for household use, and maintained the garden she had planted in May. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, reorganized the pantry, and spent her evenings reading or sketching by lamplight. On the 4th day, disaster struck. Adelaide woke to the sounds of animals in distress. She rushed outside in her nightgown to find that one of the horses, a valuable breeding mare, had somehow gotten out of her stall and was tangled in loose wire near the barn. The mare was panicking, thrashing against the wire that was cutting into her legs. Adelaide's first instinct was to run for help, but there was no one to run to. Thomas, Jack, and Samuel were days away. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles distant. If she did not act, the mare would injure herself seriously or possibly die. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Adelaide approached the terrified horse slowly, speaking in the calm, soothing voice she had heard Thomas use. The mare's eyes rolled white with fear, but she stilled slightly at Adelaide's approach. "Easy, girl," Adelaide murmured. "I am going to help you. Just hold still for me." She could see that the wire was wrapped around the mare's front legs, already causing bleeding where it had cut through the hide. Adelaide knew she needed to calm the horse completely before attempting to remove the wire, or the mare would thrash and make everything worse. She spent nearly an hour just standing with the horse, talking to her, stroking her neck, gradually earning her trust. Finally, the mare was calm enough that Adelaide dared to kneel and examine the wire more closely. It was old barbed wire, probably left over from previous owners of the land. Someone, likely Thomas or the hands, had meant to dispose of it, but it had been forgotten. Working carefully, Adelaide began to unwind the wire from around the mare's legs. It was painstaking work. The wire was twisted in places and had to be cut with pliers Adelaide retrieved from the barn. Every few minutes the mare would start to panic again, and Adelaide would have to stop and calm her before continuing. The sun was high overhead by the time Adelaide finally freed the last strand of wire. The mare's legs were bleeding from multiple cuts, but none looked deep enough to be life-threatening. Adelaide led the horse slowly back to her stall and spent the next hour cleaning and bandaging the wounds as she had seen Thomas do with injured animals. Only when she was satisfied the mare would be all right did Adelaide allow herself to collapse. She sat in the straw of the barn, her nightgown torn and bloody, her hands shaking with delayed reaction, and cried from sheer exhaustion and relief. But she had done it. She had faced a crisis alone and handled it. The knowledge filled her with pride. When Thomas returned 12 days after he had left, sun-bronzed and tired but jubilant about the prices he had gotten for the calves, Adelaide met him at the door with a kiss and then led him to the barn to show him the mare. "What happened?" he asked immediately, seeing the bandages. Adelaide explained the situation and everything she had done. She watched Thomas's face as she talked, trying to gauge his reaction. When she finished, Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "You saved her," he said. "This mare is one of the best breeding animals I have. If you had panicked, if you had not known what to do, I could have lost her. You did an incredible job, Adelaide." "I was terrified," Adelaide admitted, "but there was no one else. It had to be me." "That is what makes it brave," Thomas said. "Being afraid but doing what needs to be done anyway. You are a true rancher's wife." That summer was one of the happiest periods of Adelaide's life. She and Thomas worked side by side, building not just a ranch but a true partnership. They talked about everything, shared their dreams and fears, learned each other's quirks and habits. They made love under the stars on warm nights and spent quiet evenings reading aloud to each other. In August, Adelaide realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be certain before telling Thomas, not wanting to raise his hopes prematurely. When she finally told him over dinner one evening, Thomas's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He jumped up from his chair, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around the room. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Thomas said. "Adelaide, you have given me everything. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Adelaide continued to help with ranch work as much as she was able, though Thomas became increasingly protective as her belly grew. She found herself grateful for the isolation of the ranch. as she could wear comfortable loose dresses without worrying about town gossip or societal expectations. Winter arrived again, marking a full year since Adelaide had stepped off that train in Chico. This winter was milder, without the harsh cold snap that had characterized her arrival, and Adelaide was grateful for that as her pregnancy advanced. In February of 1886, during a mild afternoon, Adelaide's labor began. Thomas immediately rode for the nearest neighbor, Mrs. Sarah Bennett, who had experience as a midwife. She arrived within 2 hours and took charge of the situation with calm efficiency. Thomas was banished from the bedroom, but refused to go further than the main room, pacing like a caged animal as he listened to Adelaide's labored breathing and occasional cries of pain. Jack and Samuel, who had been alerted to the situation, kept Thomas company and tried to distract him with talk of spring planting and cattle. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Just as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink, the strong cry of a newborn baby filled the house. Mrs. Bennett emerged from the bedroom, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced, "a big, healthy boy with a strong pair of lungs. And your wife is tired but doing well." Thomas barely heard the last part. He rushed into the bedroom to find Adelaide propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered and smiled. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Thomas approached almost reverently and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, tiny fingers curled into fists. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Adelaide." Adelaide felt tears slide down her cheeks. What should we name him? They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Thomas said, "What about Matthew? It was my father's name." "Matthew Oakes," Adelaide said, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world." The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Matthew proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept his parents awake at all hours. Thomas was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a crying infant, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with obvious adoration. Adelaide marveled at the change in her life. 2 years ago, she had been alone and desperate in Boston. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a beautiful son, and a home on a California ranch. Sometimes she had to pinch herself to believe it was all real. As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas expanded the herd, built additional outbuildings, and even hired 2 more ranch hands to help with the increased workload. The house was expanded as well, with Thomas adding 2 more bedrooms in anticipation of more children. Those children came in due time. When Matthew was 2, Adelaide gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace. The girls were identical, with Adelaide's brown hair and Thomas's gray-blue eyes, and they quickly proved to be double the trouble and double the joy. Life was full and chaotic with 3 small children, but Adelaide would not have changed a moment of it. She had found her place in the world, her purpose. She was a wife, a mother, and a rancher, and she embraced all 3 roles with enthusiasm. In the spring of 1890, 5 years after Adelaide had arrived in Chico, Thomas decided it was time to make some improvements to the ranch house. Business had been good, and he wanted Adelaide to have a more comfortable home. "I want to add a proper parlor," he told her as they discussed plans. "And maybe expand the kitchen. You have been making do with that small workspace for too long." "The house is fine as it is," Adelaide protested, but she was touched by his consideration. "Maybe to you," Thomas said, But I want you to have nice things. You deserve them." The improvements were made that summer, and Adelaide delighted in her enlarged kitchen with its new stove and additional counter space. The parlor became a gathering place for the family, with comfortable furniture and shelves for the growing collection of books. As the children grew, they each developed distinct personalities. Matthew, now 5, was serious and thoughtful like his father, already showing an interest in the workings of the ranch. Emma was adventurous and fearless, always getting into mischief. Grace was gentle and artistic, often found drawing pictures with charcoal on scraps of paper. Adelaide taught all 3 children to read and write, conducting lessons at the kitchen table each morning. She was determined that her children would have the education she had lacked. Thomas supported this completely, often joining the lessons when his work permitted. In the fall of 1892, when Matthew was 6 and the twins were 4, the family made a trip to San Francisco. It was Adelaide's first visit to a large city since leaving Boston, and she was amazed at how much San Francisco had grown. The streets teemed with people, cable cars climbed the steep hills, and the harbor was crowded with ships from around the world. They stayed for a week, visiting museums, riding the cable cars, and simply enjoying being together as a family away from the demands of the ranch. On their last evening, Thomas took Adelaide to dinner at a fancy restaurant while the children stayed at the hotel with a hired sitter. Over champagne and oysters, Thomas took Adelaide's hand across the table. "Do you remember that frozen platform in Chico?" he asked. "How could I forget?" Adelaide said with a laugh. "I thought I was going to die there." "I took one look at you, shivering and scared but refusing to give up, and I knew you were special," Thomas said. "I knew I had made the right choice in sending for you, but I had no idea how right that choice was. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, Adelaide. A real home, beautiful children, a partnership that makes every day better. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved me that day on the platform. Not just from the cold, but from a life that was slowly destroying me. You gave me purpose and love and a family. I cannot imagine my life without you, Thomas. I do not want to imagine it." They kissed across the table, earning indulgent smiles from other diners, and Adelaide felt the same flutter in her stomach she had felt the first time Thomas had kissed her as his wife. That night in their hotel room, after they had checked on the sleeping children, they made love with the passion and tenderness of 2 people who knew each other completely and loved each other more for that knowledge. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Matthew grew into a lanky, responsible boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch work with enthusiasm. The twins remained inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a way only they understood. In 1894, Adelaide gave birth to another son, Timothy, who had Thomas's dark hair and Adelaide's gentle nature. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management. He became known throughout Northern California as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher. Other ranchers sought his advice on breeding and land management. He and Adelaide were respected members of the community, known for their integrity and generosity. In 1897, when Adelaide was 34 and Thomas was 41, they sat together on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard. Matthew, now 11, was teaching 7-year-old Emma and Grace to rope a fence post. 3-year-old Timothy toddled after his older siblings, trying to keep up. "Can you believe it has been 12 years?" Adelaide asked, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime," Thomas said. "Other times it feels like yesterday that I found you on that platform." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not made it to the station in time?" Adelaide asked. "If you had been delayed even longer?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I do not like to think about it," he said finally, "but I suspect you would have found a way to survive." "You are the strongest person I know, Adelaide. You would have managed somehow." "Maybe," Adelaide said, "but I am grateful I did not have to. I am grateful for every day we have had together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children and feeling the satisfaction of a life well lived. The ranch spread out before them, the land they had worked together to build into something prosperous and sustainable. The house behind them was filled with laughter and love, a true home in every sense of the word. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thomas pulled Adelaide closer and kissed the top of her head. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Adelaide replied. "Always." The children ran up onto the porch, breathless and excited, talking over each other about their day's adventures. Adelaide and Thomas listened with interest, asking questions and offering praise. When it grew too dark to play outside any longer, they all went inside together. Adelaide made dinner while Thomas helped the children wash up. They ate together at the large table, the conversation lively and full of laughter. After dinner, the family gathered in the parlor. Adelaide read aloud from a book while the younger children leaned against their parents and Matthew sat on the floor, following along with his own copy. It was a simple scene, repeated countless times over the years, but it never lost its sweetness. When the children were finally tucked into bed, Adelaide and Thomas retreated to their own room. They undressed in comfortable silence, the ease of long familiarity making words unnecessary. In bed, Thomas pulled Adelaide into his arms and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You remember," Thomas said quietly, "when I told you I wanted a partner, someone to build a life with?" "I remember," Adelaide said. "I got so much more than a partner," Thomas continued. "I got my best friend, the love of my life, the mother of my children. I got everything I never knew I needed." Adelaide tilted her head to look at him. "So did I," she said. "I came to California looking for security and found love instead. Found a home, found myself." They kissed slowly and deeply, the passion between them undimmed by years of marriage. As they made love that night, Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The desperate decision to answer an advertisement from a stranger. The terrifying train journey across a continent. The frozen platform and the moment when she thought she might have made a fatal mistake. And then Thomas's voice cutting through the cold and fear. "I have been waiting for you." He had been waiting for her. And she had been waiting for him, though she had not known it at the time. Two lonely people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Matthew eventually took over more and more of the day-to-day operations, showing the same skill and dedication his father had. The twins grew into beautiful young women, Emma still adventurous and Grace still artistic. Timothy developed a head for figures and kept the ranch accounts with meticulous precision. Thomas and Adelaide watched their children grow with pride and occasional bittersweet sadness as they realized how quickly time was passing. But they never took a moment for granted. They continued to make time for each other, for quiet conversations and stolen kisses, for walks through their beloved valley and evenings by the fire. When Matthew was 20, he married a young woman from town named Catherine Stewart. She was a doctor's daughter, educated and kind, and Adelaide welcomed her into the family with open arms. 2 years later, Matthew and Catherine gave Adelaide and Thomas their first grandchild, a boy they named Theodore after his grandfather. Holding her grandson for the first time, Adelaide felt her heart overflow with gratitude. She looked across the room at Thomas, who was beaming with pride, and silently thanked God or fate or whatever force had brought them together. The twins married within a year of each other. Emma wed a rancher's son from Sacramento, a rough and tumble man who could match her adventurous spirit. Grace married an artist she met in San Francisco, a gentle soul who understood her quiet nature. Timothy, who was now a teenager, declared he was too busy with the ranch to think about marriage, though Adelaide suspected that would change soon enough. As Adelaide approached her 50th birthday in 1903, she found herself reflecting on her life with deep satisfaction. She had lived through so much, survived hardships she never could have imagined as a girl, and found happiness beyond her wildest dreams. The ranch now sprawled over 2,000 acres, with over 800 head of cattle, and a reputation that extended throughout California and beyond. The house had been expanded twice more, and was now a sprawling, comfortable home filled with children and grandchildren during family gatherings. But more than the material success, more than the comfortable life they had built, Adelaide treasured the love she shared with Thomas. After nearly 20 years of marriage, they were still each other's favorite person. They still talked late into the night about everything and nothing. They still held hands while walking through the valley. They still made love with passion and tenderness. One evening in the spring of 1904, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Adelaide back to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. The wildflowers were in bloom again, carpeting the hillside in blue and gold just as they had all those years ago. They spread a blanket and lay side by side, just as they had on that long-ago day, looking up at the impossibly blue California sky. 20 years, Thomas said wonderingly. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Adelaide said. Sometimes I still see myself on that frozen platform, scared and alone, and then I look at my life now and I cannot quite believe it is real. It is real, Thomas assured her. We are real. This love is real. He rolled onto his side to face her, propping his head on his hand. Thank you, he said seriously, for taking a chance on a stranger, for building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren and more happiness than one man deserves. Adelaide reached up and cupped his face in her hand. Thank you for waiting for me on that platform, for saving me, for loving me. I will always love you, Thomas said, until my last breath and beyond. And I will always love you, Adelaide replied. They kissed as they had kissed 20 years ago in this very meadow, and Adelaide felt the same thrill, the same deep contentment. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, her home. Not in a location, though she loved California and the ranch with all her heart, but in the man beside her. Thomas Oakes had saved her life that frozen day in January of 1885. But more than that, he had given her a reason to live. He had shown her what love could be, what partnership and respect and true intimacy looked like. He had given her children and a home and a life filled with purpose and meaning. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the meadow in shades of gold and orange, Adelaide and Thomas held each other close. They did not know how many more years they would have together, how many more sunsets they would watch, how many more memories they would make. But they knew that whatever time they had, they would face it together. The girl who had frozen on that icy platform had been reborn into a woman who knew her own strength and worth. The lonely rancher who had advertised for a wife had found a partner who exceeded his wildest dreams. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a voice cutting through the cold and fear, speaking words that would change two lives forever. "I have been waiting for you." As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Thomas grew old together with grace and gratitude. They watched their children raise their own families, watched their grandchildren grow and flourish. The ranch passed to Matthew's capable hands, with Timothy managing the financial side with impressive skill. In 1915, when Adelaide was 52 and Thomas was 58, they celebrated the birth of their 10th grandchild. Surrounded by their large, boisterous family during a summer gathering, Adelaide looked around the table and felt overwhelmed with emotion. Every person present, from the oldest to the youngest, existed because she had been brave enough to answer an advertisement and desperate enough to take a chance on a stranger. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Adelaide and Thomas sat on their porch looking at the stars. The sounds of their family sleeping inside the house, the familiar landscape of the ranch stretching out before them, the warmth of Thomas's hand in hers, everything combined to create a moment of perfect peace. "I could not have imagined this," Adelaide said softly. "That day on the platform, I was just hoping to survive. I never imagined I would thrive, that I would be this happy." "I knew," Thomas said. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not realize how much or how wonderful that change would be." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had built a life together from nothing but hope and determination and love. The ranch they had created together would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations. But their true legacy was the love they had shared, the family they had raised, the example they had set of what a true partnership could be. Adelaide Oakes, who had once been Adelaide Zimmerman, frightened mail-order bride freezing on a California platform, had found her happily ever after. Not because a man had saved her, though Thomas certainly had, but because she had been brave enough to save herself by taking a chance on the unknown. And Thomas Oakes, lonely rancher who had advertised for a practical wife, had found love beyond his wildest imaginings. Not because Adelaide had been perfect, but because she had been real, honest, and willing to build a life alongside him. As they finally rose to go to bed, Adelaide paused and looked back at the valley one more time. She thought about all the frozen platforms in the world, all the desperate decisions made by people hoping for something better. She thought about all the voices that might cut through fear and cold to offer hope. "I have been waiting for you." Those words had changed everything. And Adelaide knew, as she climbed into bed beside her husband of 30 years, that she would never stop being grateful for the day Thomas Oakes had spoken them. Their story was one of courage and chance, of risk and reward, of a love that had grown from practical necessity into something deep and true and lasting. It was the story of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. As Adelaide drifted off to sleep in Thomas's arms, she smiled. She had been waiting for him too, though she had not known it at the time. Waiting for someone to see her worth, to value her strength, to love her not despite her flaws but because of her complete self. They had been waiting for each other, two souls destined to meet on a frozen platform in Chico, California, in the winter of 1885. And from that meeting had come everything that mattered, a lifetime of love, family, purpose, and joy. The end.